That was a cold night last night.
Yeah, we had a heavy frost, Elliot. A lot of the annuals here are dead. Look at the zinnias really got it.
Yeah, I guess it's about time to put this garden away for the winter.
Yeah, and I bet a lot of the vegetable garden suffered too. Looks like cleanup day.
I guess we better get to it.
I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman. If you'll stick with us for the next half hour, we'll show you how to put your flower and vegetable gardens to bed for the winter.
On Gardening Naturally. My little herb and flower garden has both annuals and perennials in it. This time of year, it really starts to look pretty dismal, so I get the urge to get in and tidy it up. There's another reason to do that, too. If you cut back dead matter in the flower garden, it can help prevent disease. Now, I must say that this alyssum carpet of snow is still making its pretty white carpet, and it will probably keep doing that right up until the snow falls. So I'm going to leave that be. Got some more doing it over here, too. Boy, but these zinnias, they have really had it. I'm going to get rid of those.
Hi, Barbara, I'm here to help.
Oh, good. We're just going to pull up all these zinnias, Elliot.
Looks good to me.
Now, an annual completes its whole life cycle in one season. So if I left these here, they would not come up again next year. So out they go. We're going to compost all of these.
Yeah, more food for the compost heap.
Elliot always likes that. Lots more dead zinnias over here.
Here I come.
Feels so good to get this stuff out of here. Sometimes you're almost glad when frost comes.
What about these snapdragons? They still look awfully green.
Yeah, they are, but you can see by the fact that the seed pods have formed all the way up to the tip that they finished blooming. They're not going to do anything, and since they won't come back next year, let's pull them up.
Out they go.
Now, while we're pulling up the annuals, we're going to cut back the perennials, too. The perennials in my garden will lose all of their green top growth eventually. It'll die back all the way to the ground. But the roots will keep alive under the soil and send up new little green shoots early spring. So we'll cut them back eventually. But these mallows, these are still nice and green. All I'm going to do with them is cut off these dead seed heads. This is called deadheading. Makes the garden look tidier. And in the case of these mallows, they have a tendency to self-sow a little bit too much. And I'd just as soon that that didn't happen. So off go the seed heads. Now this plant here, this is really one of my favorites. It's called Sedum Autumn Joy. And the deader it gets, the prettier it gets. In this case, these were bright pink about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but now they're getting a kind of a dusty rose look. And I like that. In a few weeks, they'll have a kind of mahogany color that I like even better. And if I leave these all during the winter, the snow will collect on here, and it'll really be quite attractive. So I'm going to leave those for now. These asters are called Purple Robe, and they were great this year. They've almost finished blooming, but they've still got some purple, and the foliage is still very green, so I'm going to leave those for a while. Now, this perennial geranium was called Johnson's Blue. It had a really blue flower, and it's ready to be cut back technically, but boy, look at the autumn color on this geranium, Elliot. It almost looks like a sugar maple leaf. I think I'd like to look at that for a little longer. But these things, these are the annual lobelias. These have really died.
These can go? Okay.
They can definitely go. The Johnny Jump-Ups, these function as annuals in my garden because it's a very cold climate. In many gardens, these would persist and you'd leave them. I'm going to leave them a little longer, too, because, well, they're blooming very nicely. And they are also aggressive self-sowers, but I'd like these to self-sow a little bit. I'd like to get them to carpet the edge of this garden here. So I'm going to see if they're going to do that for me. I'm going to cut back this Artemisia silver mound right to the ground. It's looking pretty beat up. Now this baby's breath still has some green on it, but not much. And I think we can really cut it back too. All the way to the ground there. Take it away and compost it. Now here's a plant that really needs to be cut back. You can see this is a perennial salvia that I deadheaded several weeks ago. I cut off the dead seed heads and then let it get completely dead above ground. But now that's happened, so I'm just going to keep cutting all of these stems right to the ground. See how tidy that looks? In the early spring, that'll send up little new shoots. But this cooking sage, this is another salvia, that's still green. And I'm going to just leave this here and keep snipping away for my soups and whatever I want to put sage in. And it'll come up again. I may have to cut that back a little later when there's no more green on it. When I design a perennial garden, I always try to plan for some things that have interesting foliage even after they've finished flowering. This little corner is a good example. I have some creeping thyme, Thymus serpillum, some lady's madel, Alchemilla vulgaris is its Latin name, and some Veronica incana that had beautiful spikes of blue flowers earlier, but it still has its lovely silvery foliage now, and Sedum Vera Jameson that has nice red leaves. These will stay attractive well into the winter. Now, the Italian parsley that Elliot and I grew in here is still going strong, but this poppy has had it. I left this long after it had gotten brown and dead because I wanted it to self-sow. These little seed capsules have been spewing tiny seeds all over the garden, so next year hopefully I'll have some volunteers. But it looks like most of them have burst now, so I'm going to just cut that back. It probably won't make it, but the seedlings will. Now, this Scabiosa, the basal foliage is still green, so I'll leave that, but I'm going to cut back the top. Now, the dahlias, these we really have to deal with. In my cold climate, where the ground freezes, I can't leave them here all winter, so I'm going to have to dig them up and store them. And even southern gardeners often dig up and store their dahlias. If they divide them in the spring, they'll flower better. Oh, yeah, you got that digging fork?
I sure do, Barbara.
Now, before I dig, I'm going to cut the stems back to a few inches above the ground. More compost, Elliot.
All right.
And then I'm going to just gently pry the dahlia plant out of the ground, being careful not to break the fruits. And very gently shake the soil off. See those tuberous roots down in there? In the spring, this will make several plants. I'm not going to divide them now, though. I'm going to set them aside and let them dry for a few days. It's a fairly warm day today, so I'm not going to bring them indoors. Tonight I will, so they don't freeze. Then after they've dried for a few days, I'm going to cover them with this soilless growing mix. You could also use peat. Then I'm going to find a place where it stays about 40 degrees for the winter. Well, this looks a lot tidier, doesn't it, Elliot?
We've done a good job. Are you going to cover anything with a protective mulch?
Well, I've really tried not to plant anything that needs winter protection. The one exception might be these delphiniums over here. But I'm not going to put down any kind of mulch that would mat and collect moisture. I'm going to use something like these evergreen boughs later on. These will trap the snow and actually help keep the ground frozen, because it's that alternate freezing and thawing that can cause winter damage to plants. But I'm going to wait until the ground is thoroughly frozen before I put them on. Now, we live in an evergreen forest, so we have plenty of these. You may not have a source, so we have a good idea for you.
Merry Christmas.
Discarded Christmas trees are great for mulching. So just cut them apart in January and put them on your frozen ground to protect your plants.
Looks like the flower garden's under control. Let's go do the same for the vegetable garden. One of the crops that needs to be protected when you're putting the garden to bed in the fall is the strawberry. This is my favorite crop to eat next spring, and so it's worth any time I put in now. By protection, I mean some sort of covering against the cold. Now, I wait until we've had a couple of 20-degree or below 20-degree nights, and then I know it's time to do it. Why am I doing it? Because the crown of the plant, right here, where all the new shoots and buds and berries will come from next year, doesn't want to get too cold or you can freeze it out. But if you put some sort of protection over it, you can keep it up to 20 degrees warmer, and that'll make a big difference in next spring's crop. Before you cover it, though, you want to feed this bed and get it ready to really produce next year. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Elliot. I got you some compost.
Great. Now, I'm going to spread this compost over the bed, just about a ½ inch all through there, just to make sure that there's food in here for next year's berry production.
Here, I'll do that.
And then I'm going to put a covering on top. Now, the covering wants to be open. It could be something like these pine needles. They work well. Or it could be my favorite, straw. And I'm going to spread this straw about 4 inches loose all over these strawberries. There are some people who say that the word strawberry came because they were traditionally covered with straw. Whether that's true or not, it's a good way to remember to do this. I don't want to use autumn leaves because they would mat down and give me an airless cover that would smother out the berries. Straw or pine needles is a perfect way to protect your strawberry bed right on through the winter. If you put the straw on about 4 inches thick like this, you won't have to worry about removing it, because by next spring, it will have pressed down to about 1 inch thickness, and then the shoots that come through will be able to come right up through the straw. The new strawberry plants will be here, but best of all, the berries will have a clean mat of straw to rest upon. So remember, mulch your berries and use an open cover.
Another crop that we're going to winter over for spring eating is this bed of spinach. Now, we planted this in early fall deliberately. It's an extra hardy wintering over kind of spinach. Now, when it comes time to pick it, it's going to look pretty beat up from the winter. You're not going to see these nice green leaves, but there'll be wonderful little new shoots for our salads. Oh, 6 weeks before the last frost date.
I can hardly wait. Now, spinach is a very hardy crop, so it doesn't need the thick layer of straw like we put on the strawberries. But it does need some sort of low windbreak here to protect it against the winter cold. And just a thin sprinkling of this straw over it will make a huge difference in the amount of spinach plants that survive the winter.
Another way to do it would be with these, the same technique on my flower garden. I'm just going to lay these boughs lightly over the spinach, and that'll give them a good layer of protection.
Now, one crop we're not going to cover is this kohlrabi right here. Now, I realize kohlrabi may be an unfamiliar and a funny-looking crop. It's sort of like a turnip that decided to grow the turnip part up on the stem, but it is an amazingly winter-hardy crop and one that we can harvest right on through until the winter weather really gets cold. So rather than covering it, we're just going to leave it open here and harvest as long as possible. And then by the time that's over, there'll probably be a lot of these leaves down on the ground protecting the soil that are left over. And if not, we'll sprinkle a little straw on it at that point.
Elliot, we got to be sure to plant plenty of garlic this year because neither of us can cook without it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We like to plant our garlic in the fall for the most dependable crop. Garlic grows best if it gets off to a really early start in the spring, and the only way to assure that is to put the seed in now.
It's exactly like planting spring flower bulbs. You plant them in the fall, and then they remain dormant all winter, and then they come up in the spring, just like a daffodil or a tulip.
Now, we put our garlic in rows that are 10 inches apart. So I'm going to mark them just like this. When we put the cloves in, we put them in 4 inches apart in the row.
The neat thing about garlic is what you eat is what you plant. You just break off a little clove from the central head like this, and you plant it right side up the same way it grew.
Just make a little hole like this and continue putting them in so the top of the garlic clove is about at ground level, just about 4 inches apart like that. You notice we didn't put any fertilization on this, and that's because there was enough native fertility in here left over from the previous crop. Next spring, when this garlic starts to come up, we'll top dress it with compost, and that'll assure us a really bounteous crop. Part of putting the garden to bed is preparing the soil for next year's crops. Autumn leaves are a great resource for that. They contain a lot of plant nutrients, and they're available at just the right time of year. Now, the way I use them is just to spread them on the surface of the soil. And then I have to incorporate them. The easiest way to do that is just with a spade. I just take the spade and push them right down into the soil, as simply as that. If they don't go in the first time, oh, you can chop them a couple of other times. And what that does is to put them right into close contact with all the little microorganisms in the soil that break down organic matter and add to soil fertility. Now, the crops I'm going to plant here are the ones that I found that do best following the incorporation of autumn leaves. And those are the cabbage family. That's cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and also carrots and radishes. They seem to thrive in the conditions that these leaves create when they finish their decomposition next spring. And those conditions are an extra shot of nitrogen for the plants. Those plants love it. Tomatoes, peppers, fruiting plants like that don't do well following autumn leaves because that extra nitrogen causes them to go all to leaf rather than fruit. Now, there are other crops that need this fall preparation, and for some of them, we just put on compost.
We're going to put this bed into some early peas next year. We've got the posts all ready for a trellis we're going to put up for them. We're going to be putting them in really early, as soon as we can work the soil. So we want to get everything as ready as possible, and that includes preparing the soil now. Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And we've always found that one of the best fertilizers for peas is a good compost of either plant matter or manure. And so we have it here. We're going to spread it on the soil, about a ½ inch thick, and mix it in shallowly now before winter comes. Another way of putting the garden to bed is to grow a living cover, a living protecting crop like this winter rye. Now, rye is a grain crop, and the way I'm using it here, it's a green manure. And by green manure, I mean a crop that's just grown to fertilize the soil. Now, another crop I use that way is sweet clover. Sweet clover is a legume, and legumes have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air. That's why sweet clover is an even better soil improver, has long, deep tap roots, gets about as tall as this, has beautiful yellow blossoms. A third option is to combine a legume and a grain, and to go out in the spring in the field of winter rye that you planted the fall before and sprinkle some clover seeds right in under the rye. Do this very early. The rain will carry them in, and they'll get established. The key is that it's providing protection for the soil over winter and also growing extra organic matter to add to the fertility of the soil. Not bad for something that is practically free and happens right in your home garden.
Now, there's another covering that we're going to put on this bed and the whole rest of the garden.
In the forest, the floor is never left uncovered, and we found that that's the best thing to do in the garden. A bare soil, to my mind, is a really unhappy soil. It isn't holding the fertility, it isn't keeping together all the parts that make plants grow so well next year. And so we're going to put a covering of straw over the whole garden. Now, if you don't have straw, it could be any old organic matter that you cut around the property. It could be spoiled hay, whatever you can get. Straw happens to be easy for us to come by. But the important thing is to cover the soil, protect it over winter, and then you'll find that the growth in the soil next spring will be beyond your belief.
Okay, that should do it.
Looks good.
It's really fun getting out on a fall day and doing some work. And it's a good thing, too, because the more putting the garden to bed you can do in fall, the better garden you'll have waiting for you in the spring.
A surprising amount of this material will decompose over winter. The soil isn't as dead in winter as you think, and there is an amazing amount of bacterial action going on in the cool conditions underneath the mulch that is slowly decomposing this material. But no matter how much decomposes, by next spring there'll still be residue left on the surface, and so about 2 weeks before we're due to plant our earliest seeds, we'll come out, rake off anything that's left, and add it to the compost heap, and expose the bare soil again so the sun can get it nice and warm and ready for the spring seeds.
But right now, it's getting colder and colder and later and later. And I think it's time for you and me to go get warm.
Until next time, so long and good gardening.
Next on TLC, get started on easy home projects that anyone can handle here on Homebodies. Then indulge your creative side with Debbie Stapley on Crafts & Company here on TLC.